Okay, Frank, it's time for the latest edition of Icebreakers, which is, of course, delivered by DoorDash. There's my ding dong. And we've got some new additions to your trade targets board coming later today. Always a great read. So let's start with the goaltenders. We're already in the goaltending mindset. So there are a couple new additions on the list. Who are they?
Yeah, Alexander Georgiev and Peter Mrazek, and probably not a real shock for either one to be added to the list. But Georgiev, the Bulgarian blocker, as I like to call him, uh, very unlikely to come back to the Rangers. Had a winning record, probably a disappointing season with that 898 save percentage of goals against, closing in on three. And he was already making $2.65 million last season. The Rangers are in a spot where they're trying to be ultra competitive. They probably can find a cheaper option on the goaltending market to back up Igor Shesterkin, who's the new king of New York. And they're going to certainly be in the process of trying to unload Georgiev. When you look at what the potential return might be like, I think that's where there's a bit of a discrepancy. They view Georgiev as sort of the upper echelon of the young netminders who are ready to take the crease. He thinks that he's ready to be a number one in the NHL. The problem with that is the market historically on the trade front has not been strong. You have to only look back to Alex Nedeljkovic going from the Carolina Hurricanes to the Detroit Red Wings last year. He brought back just a third round pick. And in that case, well, the Rangers last summer were asking for a first. I don't think they get anywhere near that, especially after the season that Georgiev had. And so that's going to be an interesting name to watch. Are they willing to trade him for that type of return, or will they just, stick with him and eat a potentially higher salary given the games played and his career numbers to this point, even if he's closer to around $3 million? Peter Mrazek, on the other hand, what a disastrous contract that's been for the Toronto Maple Leafs. 2 more seasons at $3.8 million for a guy that inspired no confidence, could not stay healthy, and was given multiple opportunities to run with the ball, grab the crease of the Leafs after Jack Campbell both struggled last season and also went down with injury for a prolonged period of time. Mrazek was unable to do that. And for a Leafs team where, Matt, every single dollar counts on their cap, well, Mrazek chewing up 3.8 for each of the next 2 seasons doesn't work. The problem with that is they're very unlikely at this point to buy him out because that just prolongs the pain. It gives you 4 years of cap pain from Mrazek instead of just 2. I think they'd prefer to trade him, but the problem is it's going to be very expensive to do so as well, to convince a team to take on a contract like that.
I still remember back in the day, a scout told me his nickname for Peter Mrazek was Peter Erratic, and it's still ringing true throughout his career. There are a couple of bigger name forwards added to the list, both 25 years old. So tell me, why are they available? Who might be the suitors?
Yep, Brock Boeser and Travis Konechny. Boeser, it's very interesting to see how things have gone with the Vancouver Canucks. They've made very little progress. And for a team that really seems to be interested in bringing Boeser back on an extension, well, the talks have been kind of cold. He's due a $7.5 million qualifying offer on July 11th by 5 p.m. Eastern. And I don't have any doubt that they'll do that. I think that's the worst case scenario. I think ultimately, there seems to be a hang up on what type of deal would we be doing here? Is there interest in a long-term deal? The answer seems to be no. Can we find some sort of midterm deal, a 2 or a 3 year deal? What does the AAV look like in that case? Is it below 7.5? Who knows? They haven't been able to really even get and dive into substantive discussions to this point. And so it kind of seems like a sort of, I don't know if you even want to call it a worst case scenario, because I don't think it's the worst case, but to bring him back on a 1 year deal at 7.5 and more or less just kick the can down the road, I think the reaction has been more or less from the Boeser camp is like, well, if you're not really sold on the player, like, why don't we just make a trade here? Like, why don't you move on and get a strong return for Brock Boeser? That may be easier said than done given that contract scenario and situation. And with Travis Konechny, a bit different, certainly a bit of a different player, even though they're the same age. Konechny is a guy whose goal scoring has really fallen off a cliff, 24-24, and he was on pace for 30 goals in that pandemic shortened season in 2019-20. Hasn't gotten back to that level. You see just 16 last year in 79 games played. He's someone that the Flyers, Matt, as they got close to the deadline, were, I would say, entertaining exploratory discussions about Travis Konechny before the deadline. And I don't think they ever really got serious, but what I think that did do is lay the groundwork for what may come in a potential trade. And I think the big question that the Flyers are asking themselves at the moment is Travis Konechny the type of player who will flourish and continue to grow under John Tortorella, or is he a player that might sag and his production might sag? So, where is Travis Konechny in his career arc? Where is he heading? How much better can he get? Or is this sort of the type of player that you're going to get for the long term? Nothing wrong with that, still a valuable piece. But the thing is, there may be other teams out there, Matt, that see Travis Konechny as a bit more valuable than the Flyers do themselves.
Very interesting names to add. And Brock Besser, to me, for someone who's such a great shooting talent, still does not have a single 30-goal season in the NHL due to injuries. It's pretty crazy. I want to talk Nick Hague now. Really big, just monstrous defenseman, 6'6", ice time way up, 1840 he played per night this year with Vegas. It feels like he's someone on the rise, and yet he's on the block. So tell me why.
Well, it's simply just numbers. The Vegas Golden Knights and their cap crunch, it's real. You mentioned the size. You mentioned the minutes, also a big uptick in minutes, up 20% from last season, going from 16 to 1840. And for someone, you're looking at his career points, he was sort of in that, 14, 17, 20-point range each of the last couple of seasons. His game took a pretty big step forward last year. And so the Golden Knights are in this spot. I think ultimately they'd like to keep him. I don't think the contract is going to knock anyone's socks off in terms of what it looks like next, but can they really afford it? I view Nick Hague, and I think some other teams do, as a more or less prototypical number 5 defenseman. Can play on your second pair, can play on your third pair, depending on the situation. On a really solid team, he's probably a good third pair guy. And there's just an opportunity to pry him and potentially some others out of Vegas, given the spot that they're in with their cap. They also need to extend or try and find a new deal for Nicolas Waugh up front. He was another guy that was on our offer sheet candidate watch list that we posted on Wednesday. Just someone that they'd like to keep these guys. They just may not be able to, given the spot that they're in.
I see. And the latest edition of Trade Targets, it drops later today. So I think we have a graphic showing the top 10. And what are you looking for today that you want people to notice that really stands out about the latest edition, Frank?
Well, Kevin Fiala was in the number 2 spot, so a lot of guys around him slide up. Blake Wheeler pops up into the number 2 hole. A lot of talk in the last couple of days about Alex DeBrincat and the Chicago Blackhawks in announcing Luke Richardson as their head coach. Their GM, Kyle Davidson, was saying, look, we're certainly open to the idea of trading Alex DeBrincat. I don't get the sense at the moment that anything is front burner. I don't think that the Fiala trade had any sort of impact on what the return might be like. DeBrincat's under contract, even though he does have a big qualifying offer at $9 million after this next season ends. But as a 2-time 40-goal scorer, I think the return is significantly different, especially for DeBrincat, who is also a bit younger than Fiala as well. So that's a pretty good look at the top 5. And as we look at the other 5 that round out the top 10, I'm really curious about the Devils and that number 2 overall pick. Is someone going to step up and entice GM Tom Fitzgerald? I wonder, Matt, if this is one of those transactions, if it does happen at all, depending on what the Montreal Canadiens do with that number 1 pick, does someone fall or someone slide to them that they otherwise might not have expected to go, that might potentially open the door for GM Tom Fitzgerald to get a call at his draft table? They've said that they're open to it. Tony DeAngelo and the Carolina Hurricanes appear to be no closer on an extension there in Carolina, also as a pending restricted free agent. So lots to watch. And Matt, the funny thing about this time of year is we are now we are exactly, I should say, 1 week away from the start of the NHL draft. We're in this time where GMs are kind of doing the dance that's required to make things happen on the trade front. No real sort of progress, lots of tire kicking and lots of, hey, well, what kind of price are you looking for? And then they probably go back and have about 9 internal meetings before they finally actually get to the point where they consummate the trade. Another reason why I love the Fiala trade on Wednesday, the Minnesota Wild is saying, hey, point blank, we were not qualifying Kevin Fiala. We weren't bringing him back. we got what we felt like was a really good offer, and we're pulling the trigger. So if you had any interest in Kevin Fiala, get your final offer in, because the Minnesota Wild were like, enough, uncle, we need to move on. And I wonder if a couple other teams get to that point soon.